Going into the final round of the European Team Championship, two teams share the lead. Ukraine and Azerbaijan, both on 13 match points. Remember, in the previous round, Azerbaijan had defeated Ukraine and caught them up. So it's really between these two teams going to the final round. And Ukraine played England and Azerbaijan faced Serbia. So which of these teams, Azerbaijan or Ukraine, could do better and take first place? Well, it was yet another dramatic round. So let's plunge in and I'll show you what happened. There was an early shock in the Azerbaijan-Serbia match. So this is board one between Shahriar Mamedyarov and Alexei Sarana. Of course, Mamedyarov playing for Azerbaijan. Sarana, interesting. He's born in Russia, born in Moscow, but now plays for the Serbian team. And he vowed never to go back to Russia until the war was over or Russia pulled out of Ukraine. Sarana's father is actually Ukrainian. So, what's going on? Well, Mamedyarov spotted a very interesting tactical idea. He played bishop c7. So if that rook goes to e8, then bishop takes pawn, white is a pawn up. So Sarana had to take, and then knight takes d5. So the rook is being dragged up to that square. If it moves away, then knight takes bishop check is fantastic for white. So the knight has to be taken. And there's a threat to take on d5. The knight can't move here because of rook takes bishop. So bishop d6 is forced. The rook moved away. And really, rook takes pawn can't be allowed. Knight f6. Defends the d5 pawn. Rook takes a5. So after that little tactical flurry, the position has settled again. Very interesting balance of pieces. So black has two minor pieces, bishop and knight. White has rook and two pawns. Typical Mamedyarov, he's always striving to take the initiative. He really wants to play for a win then in this position. He didn't have to play bishop c7 in this position. It's a very comfortable position for white. But very interesting to see him going for this. Okay, so here's my first little question for you. I don't think I'll take a drink yet. How would you play if you were playing black here? Black to play. Is Sarana worse? What can he do here? Well, I think he played practically the only move. And that's rook c8. It's really important for black to get some counterplay here. So he needs to bring the rook to an active position. Mamedyarov played rook a6, hitting the bishop, which came up to e5. So these minor pieces are pretty secure. And then a4, so the queenside pawns start to advance, and rook c2, counterplay. And actually, it's not so simple to advance these pawns. Bishop is very well placed, guarding b8, and the rook is going to come behind the pawns either on b2 or a2. Might be better for white to have this rook back on the first rank, connected here, in order to, try and block out black's rook. g3 played by Mamedyarov. Well, sooner or later it's going to be necessary to solve the back rank problem, and this is logical to block out this bishop. I mean, it's a difficult position for white already. I mean, for example, a5, knight g4, hits 2 pawns. So g3, sensible. And that's a very interesting move, g4. So that's just kind of boxing in white's king. a5, Mamedyarov still rushing that pawn down, but rook a2 is an excellent move. You know, in a weird way, that rook is rather restricted on a6, actually. Has to keep guarding the pawn. Well, not off to b4, but still, it's the fact that these rooks are not working together, which is significant. King g7. And b5 from Mamedyarov. Well, you can't accuse him of not going for it. So the stakes are raised. But now it's black's turn. Knight e4. Attacking f2. Now if white plays passively, for example rook f1, then knight d2 attacks the rook. Rook d1 and d4. Really important move. So after this exchange, you can see black is breaking through on f2, and that could be decisive. You know, knight f3 and a rook takes, and suddenly there's mating nets appearing. Mamedyarov took on d5 and a check. King g2, knight g5. This was obviously overlooked. Of course, if rook takes bishop, knight f3, threaten mate. Or if f4, then knight h3, again threatening a checkmate. You can see how useful that pawn is on g4. So Mamedyarov played h3. That was taken. King h2. Now, here's your first think and drink moment. Black to play. What would you do? Cheers. Do you want to improve your chess? Get exclusive access to live masterclasses with yours truly. Get hot opening ideas. Then subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess, and for just $25 a month you get a newsletter with a detailed test game to gauge your standard of play. A monthly video with puzzles to test your calculating skills. A monthly opening survey where I give my take on a hot variation. Access to an archive of over 100 opening surveys. Access to video playlists so you can research your favourite openings using the PowerPlayChess archives. And as a patron, you are able to join in the exclusive live masterclasses where you can ask me questions directly. All this for only $25 a month. That's exceptional value. So do subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess. Enjoy the benefits and improve your chess. Sarana crashed in with bishop takes g3 check. Now if the king takes, rook g1, king f4, the h-pawn rolls through. And if king h2, then a check. And knight f3 with mates on either h2 or g1. So Mamedyarov took with the pawn. Check on the second rank. And, well, yeah, if king h1, then again we have this very attractive checkmate, rook h2. So king g1 and h2 check was the final move of the game. Because if king h1, knight e4, and knight takes g3 mate. Wow, what an absolutely blistering counterattack from Sarana there. I think it's really instructive. You know, it just shows how well the minor pieces and the rook combine. And Mamedyarov misjudged that one. In fact, coming back to this position, he's still okay here. I mean, it's a very narrow path to the draw, but basically if b6, knight f2, rook takes d5, this is still okay for white. I mean, the variations are long and complicated. But yeah, basically, white can escape like this. And that should end in a perpetual check. Or if the king tries to escape, then black is actually okay here. If b7, rook b1, I mean, it takes a lot of calculation this, but knight c6 is obviously a good move, stopping pawn queening, and after this, well, that's going to end up a draw. I mean, there are lots of ways the position can end up a draw, actually. But basically, yeah, there we go. They go around in circles. But yeah, tricky. Fantastic counterattack from Sarana. So a bad start for Azerbaijan. Now, meanwhile, Ukraine were putting pressure on England. They were slightly better on a couple of boards. But it looked like the match was going to hinge on this game. Luke McShane playing for England against Ihor Samunenkov playing for Ukraine, the 16-year-old star, against the form prodigy, Luke McShane. Now, this is the position after move 39. Highly complex. Both players absolutely going for it. Typical Luke loves complex positions. And you can see here, it's actually still even material. Rooks are very active. The queen isn't too active. I mean, it seems to me that here, all three results are possible. Luke played a typically creative move, a4. He's trying to bring his queen into the game. At the moment, it's just shut out. So what's the big idea? Well, if b takes a4, then queen b8. And, black's king could feel a bit insecure once he gets checked up the board with this queen potentially coming back. And if rook takes, then an amazing move, c4. This is obviously Luke's intention. And bringing the queen into play like this, black's king is actually in some trouble here. But Samunenkov's response was really cool. He just played a6. Wasn't tempted by the pawn at all. McShane exchanged and tried to bring his queen in like this. In fact, after rook a4, this would shut out the queen. That's actually pretty good for black. But Samunenkov played rook takes f2, really sharp. So he's looking to counterattack on the second rank, and maybe the first as well. Because you can see that black's rook can now operate on the a file. So a check. The king came up the board. I mean, if king takes rook, then you can see that the queen has come into the game beautifully. That's checkmate. So king g5. And if queen e7, actually the queen just blocks this. And in fact, no more sensible checks, and that's winning for black. So McShane played rook e1, guarding the back rank and perhaps threatening to hassle the king. Queen f6. In fact, the king is safe enough. If rook g1, then simply rook g4, and this exchange brings that g-pawn closer to a touchdown. The queen is still struggling to get into the game here. So rook d7. Queen f5 defends the d-pawn, but also threatens queen c2. A check. King g4. King is safe enough. If rook g1, king f3. And these major pieces actually protect the king very well. So rook c1 defends c2. Rook e4, nice move. Hassling the queen, but also perhaps looking to come down to e2 or e1. Queen c5. So if queen takes rook, then queen takes rook. So rook f1. This was very nicely calculated. If there's an exchange, then rook a4, and this is beautiful. Queen c4. D takes c4 is checkmate. Wow. Beautiful, beautiful mating net. So rook takes pawn played. Now, perhaps we can have our next think and drink moment. Okay, black to play. What would you do here? Black to play. Cheers. It's a forced win. Rook takes rook. Queen f4 check. King has to step back. A check. Queen a4. Queen a3. So with this, Samunenkov exchanged off the queens, and now he's ready with two connected pass pawns on the king side, and this is a very simple win. I mean, it's no real race because these pawns are just way behind. And the game ended like, the game ended like this. It's a pretty simple task to advance the h-pawn and the g-pawn. And that was the final move. Luke McShane resigned. Well, as you can see, it's not much of a race. After this, yeah, the rook gets back to stop the c-pawn, and then the g-pawn goes through very, very easily. So, in fact, the other three games in that match were drawn, and this was the decisive game. So Ukraine won the match 2.5, 1.5. Meanwhile, in the Serbia-Azerbaijan match, Serbia won that 3-1 after that great start. So let's have a quick look at the final scores. So Ukraine are the European team champions. Congratulations to them. They won with 15 match points. In second place on tiebreak, Azerbaijan with 13. Serbia on 13 points. Well, let's have a look at who were the big scorers in the Ukraine team. Mamedyarov, so solid on top board. He was the blocker. Scored eight draws. And then Volokitin on board 3 out of 6. Korobov 2.5 out of 6. But the big scorers were Igor Kovalyenko with 6.5 out of 8. Fantastic. And Ihor Samunenkov with 5.5 out of 8. So very impressive from the 16-year-old. And as for Igor Kovalyenko, a frontline soldier in the Ukrainian army, an incredible score, an incredible performance. So I'm absolutely delighted that Ukraine are European team champions. More coming up on the channel very soon. In fact, on Thursday, there's a book review. I'm going to be interviewing Axel Smith live on the channel at 5 PM UK, 1700 hours UK time. Do join me. It'll be on YouTube live, so you'll be able to join in the chat, join in the broadcast. So hopefully see you then. So much more coming soon.